Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of She Busy. I'm Asya Mahmood, and today we're going to be diving into a topic that I think is crucial for every leader, especially female leaders, and that is the power of vulnerability in leadership. Now, last week I talked about leading with gratitude, so this week I did want to stay on topic of leadership, but come at it from a different angle. And you might be familiar with the work of Brene Brown and her book, Dare to Lead. When I read that book a couple of years ago, I remember actually having trouble with the idea of applying the knowledge in real life. I'm not sure why I couldn't translate it into my own leadership, but as I was reading it, it seemed a little much at the time. I couldn't put the concepts together in how they would actually be something I could take action on in real life. But then there was a day and there was an incident at work. I was alerted by my director that a teacher of mine who'd been with me a couple of years at this point had sent out a message to the parents at the school in her classroom and had asked them to donate items for the kids in her classroom. And now look, that might not sound like a big deal, but people pay good money to come to my school, and I pride myself on providing my staff everything that they need to excel at their jobs. It's just how I operate. It's something I'm particular about. You hear a lot of childcare centers where teachers are struggling to get what they need for the classroom. They're buying things on their own. It's something that I was really, really big on that I wanted to make sure that I was doing. So for a message to go out asking parents who already pay on the higher end of childcare, asking them to provide us with materials that we need to do our jobs, it made me feel embarrassed, and it kind of triggered me, especially because I'm at a point now where I am doing well in business, and maybe a few years ago I would have needed more help, and I didn't even ask for help at that time, but now it just made me feel triggered and embarrassed, and it just went against my principles, and I panicked. And so instead of going to the teacher to talk about it, I asked my director to just take care of it right away and to go over the teacher's head and just correct the mistake by reaching out to the parents and letting them know that the message had been sent with good intentions, but it was sent in error and that their donations would not be necessary. Now, as you can imagine, but what I was not imagining at the time was that this upset my teacher. And she came to me and told me the next day about how the way that we handled the situation made her feel belittled. And in that moment, I realized that I needed to get real, because I could have pulled rank. I could have just said, well, that's just how I wanted things done and that's it. But I realized I had to tell her how I was feeling. And even if it wasn't fully justified, I told her how the message made me feel, how it triggered me, why it triggered me, and that I overreacted. And I told her how I felt that I might look to my clients, and that made me triggered. I didn't like the idea of how I was coming across to my clients through that message that she had sent. And so instead of coming to her, I just panicked in my own feelings. And so I told her, of course, more about what was going on. But in that moment, I realized that that's what the vulnerability is. That's what my vulnerability in leadership moment was. I had to let her know that I wasn't always perfect and that my human emotions could get the best of me, and that I reacted in this situation based on that, and that I understood her feelings, but I had feelings of my own, and that's why things had gone down the way that they did. And that situation was a light bulb moment for me. And when I realized how it tied in with what I was reading about when it comes to vulnerability and leadership and the themes of Dare to Lead, it all started to make more sense. So that's when I decided to take a closer look at other areas where my emotions might be driving me and where I could be more vulnerable with my team. But first, let's talk about what vulnerability in leadership really means. Many people think that vulnerability is about being weak or overly emotional, but that's just not the case. And I think that's where I was getting hung up. Vulnerability, as Brene Brown describes it, is about uncertainty, taking risk, and emotional exposure. And it's about showing up and being seen even when there are no guarantees. In leadership, this can mean admitting when you don't have all the answers, or sharing just your internal fears with your team. It's not about having a meltdown or being overly transparent to the point where it's uncomfortable, which I'm sure that's not vulnerability. That's just oversharing. I'm sure we've all been in that situation with someone, but it's about being authentic and honest. And I think as leaders, especially female leaders, we often try to pretend that we have it all figured out. And while I do believe that there is a time and a place for taking the reins and providing that strong stability and guidance that your team needs, those are times of crisis or when things might be going on. But in the day-to-day and in general business practices, I think in order to truly build a relationship with your team, it's okay to be vulnerable about your weaknesses and your fears. For example, I change my mind a lot. It's just how I operate. And for the longest time, I was nervous about people thinking that I was wishy-washy or that I lacked confidence or that I didn't know what I was doing. And I guess maybe I just sometimes felt that myself. But the truth is, decision-making wasn't always a strength of mine. It's something I got caught up in the analysis paralysis of it a lot. And over the years, I have gotten so much better. And I like to now just make a decision and go for it. And then if I feel the decision isn't working, I can quickly change my mind, and that can quickly change the course of where we're headed. And for me now, I consider that to be a strength. I feel like making a decision quickly and then having the ability to turn around and change my decision in time instead of getting emotionally attached to the decision that I made just for the sake of it being the decision that I made, I now consider it a strength. But this can be difficult for people on your team when they're trying to work with you and your ideas. So I had to be open and tell my leadership team, hey, I'm not always entirely sure which route is best, but I know a decision needs to be made in order to move forward. However, if it doesn't work out, I can and will come back and swiftly change my mind. See, I was afraid this side of me would make me seem incompetent, right? That's what the good old imposter syndrome can do for you. But being open with my team about not having all the answers and explaining my mental process actually helped us work more cohesively and build more trust among us. So instead of coming off as wishy-washy, they knew that I was making a concise decision based on the knowledge that I had and that I was willing to change it for the good of the business. They may not have understood that otherwise until I came clean and explained what I was doing and why, and that I may not always have all the answers, and that's okay. But now let's explore the connection between vulnerability and trust, because Brene Brown's research shows us that trust is built in the small moments, and what she calls are the marble jar moments. Every time you show vulnerability with your team, it's like admitting a mistake or asking for their input. You're actually adding a marble to the jar. And leaders who embrace vulnerability often find that their teams are more engaged and they're more loyal. And you know how much I love loyalty in a team and who doesn't. But why is that? It's because when you show that you're human and that you don't have it all figured out, you give other people the permission to do the same. You create a culture where people feel safe. They feel safe to speak up. They feel safe to take risks and to innovate on their own. Think about a leader that you admire, right? Chances are that they have been open about their journey, about their mistakes, about their fears. They're relatable, and that's where trust is built. And to foster vulnerability, you need to create a safe space for communication. This means encouraging open dialogue, being approachable, and listening without judgment. And one of the things I did with my team was to openly discuss my decision-making process. For instance, like I said, I would say, hey, I'm not entirely sure which route is best in this, but this is my decision for now. But if it doesn't work, I'm open to changing direction. And this openness shows that I value input, and I'm willing to adapt. And that can inspire a team to share more openly as well, especially when they're unsure. It's about building a culture where everyone feels heard and respected and has the ability to be able to come to you as their leader when they're feeling unsure of what they should be doing or what they can be doing. And it opens up that door for more collaboration together. So how can you start integrating vulnerability into your leadership style? Here's a few practical tips. Number one, admit when you don't know. It's okay to not have all the answers, and admitting this actually empowers your team to contribute their own ideas and solutions and to collaborate with you. And number two, share your own experiences. Be open about your fears. Be open about your past mistakes. This shows your team that it's okay to take risks and it's okay to fail as long as you learn and grow from the experience. And number 3, ask for feedback. Regularly be asking your team for feedback. This is something that I always talk about with clients or team. Ask for feedback and ask them for feedback, not just on your work, but on your leadership and how you are showing up for them as a leader. Because this shows them that you value their opinions and you're committed to actually growing yourself as a leader based on their feedback. And number 4, encourage team vulnerability. Foster an environment where your team feels safe to share their thoughts and their feelings without the fear of retribution or of judgment. And this might include having regular check-ins or just creating a safe space for open discussion at any time. Because remember, being vulnerable doesn't mean being weak, and you need to be passing that along to your team. It means being real. And when you are real, you invite others to be real with you, which strengthens your leadership and it builds trust. So as we wrap up today's episode, I want to leave you with a thought. How can you bring more vulnerability into your leadership? Maybe it starts with a small step, like admitting a mistake or asking someone for help. Maybe it's about sharing your vision and your fears with your team more openly. But I encourage you to take a moment and to reflect on this and consider where you can be more authentic in your leadership. And remember, again, vulnerability is not a weakness. It is a powerful tool for connection and for building trust. So thank you guys for joining me today. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with a friend or a fellow entrepreneur who might benefit from what they hear. And as always, I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences with vulnerability in leadership and just overall leadership in general. Send me a DM on Instagram. I would love to hear from you. And thank you again. And until next time.